So do filmmakers make films for 50,000, 100, 150? Yes, all the time. They get people to work for free and they pay their actors very little, if anything. They try to get free locations, free equipment, free everything. So can it be done? Of course it can be done. And it's done all the time. And by the way, can you make a good film for that amount of money? Yes, you absolutely can. If you're a good leader and you have good artistic vision. And hopefully the first or second time you do it, you make some money and then you can start to elevate it. Because how many times can you ask people to work for free? Like, honestly, you can get a favor once or twice, even if they're good friends of yours, even if they're on the same vision mission. They need to pay rent. They need to buy groceries. They need to live. And so do you, by the way. So how sustainable is it for you, the filmmaker, to keep doing that? At some point, it just, the dream runs dry a little bit because reality kicks in. Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's episode 3 of We're Making a Movie, and today we are going to pick up on where we left off about budgeting. So we're going to go into a lot more details about the budget. Then we're going to talk about financing, because now the budget's going to tell you how much you need to make the movie. And then we're going to talk about how to get that money, which will lead us into film incentives, otherwise known as tax credits. Okay, so I'm going to start, and then I'm going to give it over to Sully. So the budget basically is an overview of how much money you need to spend to make a good movie, or a movie that you can afford to make. And as we sort of mentioned before, there's kind of 2 ways to budget. There's what I call top-down budgeting and bottom-up budgeting. So top-down budgeting is when you take your script and you break it down and you put it into the scenes, and then you say, these are the number of days we need to use that are required to shoot the movie based on our schedule. These are the elements that we broke down in the script that we're going to require. Here's the number of actors. Here's the types of locations. Here's the amount of crew that we think we need to do it properly. Here's all the props and wardrobe and all this. And that's the proper way to do it. It's basically you say, here's what we need to shoot the movie properly. And then you line item all of it in a budget. You add it across, you estimate how much each thing is going to spend, or each thing is going to cost. And you put each item down, which Sally's going to show you in a few minutes. And then you add it all up. And at the end of at the bottom, you're going to come up with a number. Say it's $647,261. Just, I made that up randomly, okay? Because these are what each expense amounts to, and it adds up to that. All right. So that would be great. And now that's the number that you need to make your movie properly based on everything that you have calculated and broken down. The question is, now you got to go get $647,000 to make the movie. So the question is, can you get that money? Which is about financing, which I'm going to get into in a minute, but I want to finish budgeting first. So let's say that you think, okay, I can get that money. Then great, that's your budget. But let's say you think that, you're being funded by your rich Uncle Charlie. And I use rich Uncle Charlie as, sort of the funding source, as generic funding source. I call it rich Uncle Charlie. All right. He's your funding source. And he says to you, I can only give you $500,000. That's the max I'm going to give you to make your movie. And you say, but Uncle Charlie, I need 647,000. And he says, well, I'm only giving 500. That's the max you can get. Figure it out. So now you have to go back, and let's say there's no other sources, no other rich Uncle Charlies, no other tax credits, nothing. That's the entire world of financing. So you only have $500,000 available to you. So what you got to do is you got to trim that budget and get it down to 500,000. But the first question you have to ask is, how much can I afford to trim to the point where I'm going to compromise the movie so much where it's not even worth making it because I can't make the movie that I want to make? Because remember, I've always said you got to make a good movie. So if you start cutting and cutting and cutting, and it compromises the movie so much that it's not going to be a good movie anymore, then this is all for naught. You're wasting your time. You're not going to be proud of your movie. It's not going to be a good movie. Chances are it won't sell. So there probably is a little bit of cutting you can do. And this is a decision you as a filmmaker have to make yourself. You have to decide how much you can compromise and cut to the point where you have not completely killed the artistic vision of the movie. So 647 to 500, is a pretty sizable cut. but it's not crazy, crazy. It's like 22% you're cutting. It's a lot, but let's say it's doable. All right. So now what you have to do is you have to take that $500,000 number, the number that Uncle Charlie's going to give you, put it at the bottom. That's your final number. So all of your line items have to add up to that. So you know that has to be your total. So you put that at the bottom and you reverse engineer your budget and you go upwards and you start looking, what can I trim? What can I trim? What can I trim? And as you're trimming, if you're doing it on a Excel spreadsheet, the number is coming down lower and lower and lower until it hits that $500,000 level. That's what we call bottom up budgeting. You know what your final number has to be, and you have to basically trim everything or cut certain things in order to get there. Now, I can tell you, most indie films are budgeted that way. They're budgeted bottom up. Every big budget Hollywood film is budgeted top down, as it should be. That is the proper way to budget, but because they don't have limitations generally on how much they can spend. But on an indie film, there's usually limitations on how much money you have available to you or how much money it makes sense to shoot for, because how much can you actually recoup from your film. So chances are you're going to start with a number that you want to bring your film in at, and then you're going to reverse engineer the budget bottom up. And the quickest and easiest way to cut out of a film budget is to cut the number of shooting days. Because the minute you cut a shooting day out, you've cut out every single expense involved in that day. And when Sully goes through the budget with you, you're going to see everything is sort of based on the number of shooting days. So let's say you have 17 shooting days in your $647,000 budget. And let's say each shooting day costs you, I don't know, $30,000 because of your crew and your food and your locations, your equipment, and all these rentals. And you need to lose maybe 3 days to bring it down to another $120,000 less, or maybe even 4 days. Then all of a sudden you have to say, okay, that's a quick way to do it, right? So let's say I cut my shooting budget from 17 days to 14 days. Can I actually make the film I want to make in 14 days as opposed to 17 days? Now, all of a sudden, instead of shooting, say, an average of 5 pages of script a day or 6 pages of script a day, now you're shooting 8 pages of script a day. Can you do it? Can your director do it? Can your crew do it? Can you move that quickly? It may involve taking out or rejigging some of the scenes. So that's the quick, easy way to cut down a budget. The other way you can do it is you can start to take out certain expenses. Like you could rewrite your script a little bit so that some of the scenes are less expensive. Maybe have fewer background people. Maybe have fewer characters. Maybe you're writing out a whole plot line. Maybe fewer effects. There's lots, depending on the type of movie that you're doing, you can always trim it down to find extra money. It's at the expense of being artistic, though. So every filmmaker is going to have a balance point where they say, I can cut it down, but at the minute I cut it this much, it's over. I'm not making the film I want to make. So that's the art of doing bottom up budgeting, is understanding how much you can compromise to the point where you're not going to kill the artistic vision of the movie. And it's a juggle.
So Jeff, you said that you don't want to cut it too far back to a point where you can't make a good film anymore. Obviously, it depends on the genre and how many special effects are in the movie, but would you say there is a baseline level of most of the time you can't make a good movie under this budget level?
So I do say that, but that's relative and very subjective on my part. Okay. And so a lot of filmmakers, like I say, you can't really make a decent feature film, pretty well any genre, for less than 500,000. That's what I say. Okay. But I also say I like to pay everybody. Like everybody needs to get paid a fair wage. All my crew is going to get paid. All the actors get paid a fair wage. I'm going to feed everybody properly. I'm going to use proper equipment. I'm going to use proper vehicles. I'm going to get proper insurance. I'm going to do this properly. All right. So I'm not as guerrilla style indie filmmaking as a lot of, say, younger, more aggressive people are. I used to be that way, but I don't do that anymore. Maybe it's an age thing or an experience thing or whatever. So even at 500, that is really, really cutting it very tightly. It's, crew getting paid as little as possible, but, a fair wage. This is a range of fair. So, on a 500, it would be at the low end of the fair range, and maybe at 8 or 900, it'd be the higher end of a fair wage. But there are lots and lots of young, I'm going to say young, there are lots of indie filmmakers who say to me, no, no, I could shoot for $150,000. And I say, like, are you paying anybody? Well, I'm paying them, $25 a day and giving them a Subway sandwich, and they're happy. But how sustainable is that? I mean, you could get away with doing that for one film, maybe two, but people have to make a living. So that is more what I call hobby filmmaking, where you can get away with it and do it because everybody's really excited. They want to get a credit. They're willing to do it once, maybe twice, but they can't do that for a living because you can't live off $25 a day, right? So do indie filmmakers make films for 50,000, 100, 150? Yes, all the time. And that's how they do it. They get people to work for free or defer, and they pay their actors very little, if anything. They try to get free locations, free equipment, free everything. So can it be done? Of course it can be done. And it's done all the time. It's just I'm a career indie filmmaker. Like, I like to make it look like I treat it as a business. People who work for me get paid. I sell the movies. I want them to look good. So it's not my business model anymore, but it is a viable working business model for people who generally are starting out. And by the way, can you make a good film for that amount of money? Yes, you absolutely can. If you're a good leader and you have good artistic vision. So there are tons and tons of stories, like Al Mariachi and Napoleon Dynamite and Blair Witch and all these films that got made for $50,000 or less and turned out to be huge hits. I mean, to me, those are the anomalies because, for every one of those, there's probably 100,000 that didn't go that well. So that's like, these are the people who won the lottery. But it's possible. You just have to be able to motivate people, get them excited to come on the journey with you at least once for this one, and then be able to spend the money, the very little money that you have, in ways that it's going to show on screen the most, and have a really good vision as to what you're doing. Because if you're super artistic and you're a really good director, and you have a good eye, then yes, you can deploy your resources very, very strategically and get it done. I just wouldn't make a career out of doing it that way. And hopefully the first or second time you do it, you make some money, and then you can start to elevate it. Because how many times, Jared, can you ask people to work for free? Like, honestly, you can get a favor once or twice, even if they're good friends of yours, even if they're on the same vision mission. They need to pay rent. They need to, buy groceries. They need to live. And so do you, by the way. So how sustainable is it for you, the filmmaker, to keep doing that? At some point, it just the dream runs dry a little bit because reality kicks in. So for everybody who makes their first film, you could pull that off. But there's certain things you can't pull off. Like, you can't get always lucky with people giving you the right location. You can't always depend on people giving you the right equipment at no cost or whatever. Sometimes you can, but you can't necessarily depend on that. So if you're really well connected, you have lots of friends who have the right equipment, can get you into the right locations, good friends who are actors, editors, good crew people, and you can, Sally, I mean, you just graduated with 350 other people from film school who, probably half of them are pretty talented. So could you all get together and make a movie and pool your resources, and maybe everybody throws in $2,000 and you pay for a few things? Yeah. Could you do it? Yeah, of course you could do it. Somebody's got to lead the charge and have the vision, and but you can't do that many. You can do it once, maybe twice. So does that answer your question, Jer?
Yeah, that covers it very well.
Okay. So I'm saying, so in the budgeting process, most indie films will get bottom up budgeting. You'll have a certain amount that you can deploy, and you just got to deploy it as strategically as possible. And in making that decision, how much you want to compromise, it's a very personal decision, usually on the part of the director in conjunction with the producer, because the director's the one who is, delivering the film artistically, and he or she has to really have a good handle on what artistically they can deliver it for those limited funds. So if they believe, so it's funny, a lot of filmmakers say to me, I only have 250. What they do is they hire me to do their investor pitch packages, and I do it. and we talk about it a lot. And it's and when I do their budgets for them, and we realize they need 500,000, right? And they say I only have access to 250,000, half of that. And I say, well, you've got a choice. You've got to either really compromise what you're going to shoot, or don't make this movie this time. Make another movie, a much, much less expensive movie for 250. Put this one aside. Hopefully you'll make a good movie. You'll prove yourself, and then somebody will fund you for the 500. No, no, no. I want to make the movie for 250. And I say, well, why didn't we just start with that? Why didn't you just tell me 250? Like, why do we have to go through the whole exercise of wasting your time and money and my effort to budget it at 500? Just tell me you got 250. And then I could have probably said to you, you're going to have to really compromise. And I think it's a really bad business decision and a career decision to try to shoot something, half-assed that you're not going to really be able to deliver. And I'll tell you why. It's going to be tough to sell. All right. Because you're going to say, well, that's all I had to spend. And the world doesn't care that that's all you have to spend. They just care about how good the movie is. So nobody's going to say, oh, wow, he did such a good job for half of what he should have had. Nobody will say that. They'll all say, oh, this movie looks terrible. All right. Secondly, as a filmmaker, you're going to second guess yourself for the rest of your life. You're going to say, like, gosh, I mean, it's okay, but it's nothing close to what I envisioned. It's nothing close to what I could have done had I had more money. So you don't want to feel like you've compromised your integrity, your artistic ability as a filmmaker. So at some point, it's just a better decision to say, maybe this project's a little too aggressive for the amount of money I have available. Maybe I should hope that I could hold back on that, even though that's my dream project and it might be the only film I get to make in my life. But I want to make it properly. So I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to make something a little less aggressive, or a little, easier to make and cheaper to make, and try to get the one you really want to do at the higher budget level to be your second one. The only problem with that is sometimes you don't get a second chance, because sometimes, it's too hard to raise funding the second time and you didn't make money the first time. So it is a bit of a balancing act. And when I work with filmmakers, I gauge a lot of things. I gauge, who they are as a person, what ability how much persistence they have, how much they believe in themselves, what their ability is to fundraise, like what their circles are. Notice I haven't said anything about filmmaking yet. It's all about personality, leadership, persistence, confidence. That's what it's all about, because that's what drives it at this level. And I just assume you're talented, because if you're not talented, then you got big problems. Then if you don't have a good artistic vision, then no matter how much you spend, it's probably not going to come out anyways. So I check the box. You're talented.
For you, Jeff, just with your experience, since I know you have like hundreds of consultations a year with different filmmakers, um, um, with filmmakers who do decide like, yeah, I only have 250, I'm doing this story, I'm making this movie, and they end up making their movie. Have you seen that kind of help or hurt their career in the long term? Like, is that almost hurtful if they end up making a bad film for people who want to be career filmmakers?
Okay, so that's a really, really good question, and it's a bit of a loaded question, and I'm going to say it depends on the person, and I'll tell you why. Some people are super happy that they just got their film made, and that's it. Their life, they can move on with their life. They said, I needed to make this film. It was like a midlife crisis. I got it made. It doesn't matter that I compromised everything. It doesn't matter that it's not as good as I wanted it to be, that I don't love it even. You're going to love it because you're the filmmaker, but it's not nearly as good as you want it to be, but you got it made. All right. So at least there's some reality there. But I'm going to say for most people, the dream is actually better than the reality. It's better actually not to make the film, because if the film doesn't come out well, it's not going to sell. And if it doesn't sell, you can't use it as a selling feature to sell your next film. So it's better you don't tell anybody that you actually made that film. Because the minute you say, oh, here's my first film, they're going to say, how did it do? And you're going to have to lie, because if you tell them the truth that it completely tanked and it was the worst film and they're going to want to see it, then it's not going to bode well for you. So for the next film, for getting finance on the next film. So what you could do is you could say, this was sort of my learning film. It was my mentorship. It was not my real film. I just did it to learn a lot. It's almost like going to school. It was my film school education. And if you've been to film school, part B. All right. It was part of my educational learning process. If you approach it that way and say that's what it was, and it wasn't necessarily meant to make money or be successful. I mean, hopefully it could have been, but if it didn't, the idea was that you learned from it. So if you approach it that way, then it's a good thing. But if you approach it as, hey, this was my epic film and I tried, and sorry, it didn't look good because I just didn't have enough money, but look at how good it looks for what I made it for. Everybody's going to say, you're an idiot because you shouldn't have made it because it looks terrible, actually. Yeah, relative to the fact that you only had half of what you needed. That hip hooray, wonderful, but you're not financeable in the future because the film looks so bad and you didn't make any money with it. And we can't trust you. So that could be a setback if you play it out that way. So it depends on the person, how they approach it, what their sort of strategy is, and how they do it. So I do say to people, I say, look, do you think that if your film fails, you're going to be able to move on from this? Like, are you going to be able to gather up the pieces, or are you going to move into another say career path and say that you got this done? Is this a midlife crisis for you, or is it a career building component? If it's career building, let's position it as an as an educational project, as a learning thing. All right. That way it takes the pressure off of you. But how many people actually want to finance your education? Not too many. You're still going to have a chance. You're going to release it and hopefully it'll work. But if it doesn't, your excuse is going to be you learned from it. And hopefully Uncle Charlie, rich Uncle Charlie, who gives you that $250,000, is going to be happy for you that he helped you get an education, as opposed to sending you to some expensive private school for the same $250. And to be honest with you, it's probably, if you want to be a filmmaker, the $250 you spent on the film is probably a better education than if you went to some hoity-toity expensive film school that cost you $250 over 4 years. I mean, it'd be nice to do both, but that's a good education. You learned a lot. And hopefully then you can go to Uncle Charlie and say, okay, I learned a lot. Now let's go make the real film for 500. And this is what I really want to do. And hopefully he'll believe you. But a lot of people won't. A lot of people say that was your shot. If you didn't think you could do it properly, you shouldn't have taken the shot. You should have waited until you could take the proper shot. So it just depends on the person, their personality, where they're at in their life, how they think. A lot of it is not necessarily about filmmaking, but about life coaching, about understanding who somebody is and where they are at in their life and what they want to try. And that's the truth. And so that's the discussion I generally have with the filmmakers. Now, a lot of them say, phone me afterwards, consult with me after they've made their film for $75,000 and it's not so good. And, oh, now what do I do with it? How do I sell it? And I say, here's what you do. You try this, this, and this, but it's going to be really tough because, frankly, the film doesn't look so good. Well, it's as good as I could do. I said, yeah, no, I understand it's as good as you can do. Congratulations. Way to go. You did a good job for your very limited funds, but it looks terrible. Like the audience isn't going to want to necessarily see it. So let's try whatever we can. But now you're going to have to decide, what do you want to tell to your investors next time around? Do you want to go and say, hey, I completely compromise my integrity and my film doesn't look good because I didn't have money? Or do you want, it's a strategy. This is a business strategy. And if you're the investor, what do you want to hear from the filmmaker? So it just depends who your circle of friends is and your potential investors are, and you make that decision.
Thanks for watching this episode of We're Making a Movie. Make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for our next episode.